The boy said he had never heard his father's voice except through a screen. He said there was only one video. He said it wasn't a message, and it wasn't a goodbye. It was a singing lesson, recorded by a dying man who had decided that the most useful thing he could leave behind wasn't words of love, but a skill his son could actually use. He asked the engineer to play it. The screen lit up. A young man appeared, thin, pale, sitting at a kitchen table with a guitar, explaining breath support to a baby who could not yet understand him, teaching a lesson to someone who would not be able to use it for years. Simon Cowell watched the whole thing in silence. When it ended, he sat there with both hands pressed to his face, and Simon Cowell broke down. Another Tuesday night taping, the Dolby Theater in Los Angeles, packed with 3,000 people. Cameras rolling. Millions watching from home. Another hopeful contestant stepping into the spotlight. Simon Cowell sat at the judge's table in his black shirt, arms crossed, that familiar expression of measured attention in place. Something about the boy's technique in his audition tape had nagged at him for 2 days. He had asked his team to look into it. They had found something that morning that he had not yet fully processed. The boy who walked out that night was 9 years old. His name was Eli Marsh. He was small, serious, dressed neatly in a collared shirt that looked carefully chosen, and he carried himself with the particular composure of a child who has grown up around adults discussing something heavy and has absorbed the gravity of it without quite having the words for it yet. Terry Crews crouched all the way down to him. "Eli, hey there. Welcome. How old are you?" 9, Eli said. 9 years old. Up here in front of everybody. That's brave. Tell us about yourself." "I'm from Indianapolis. I live with my mom." He paused. "I've never met my dad. He died when I was a baby. I was 8 months old." The audience made the soft, careful sound that this kind of sentence produces, sympathy without the sharper edge of a loss that someone can actually remember, the particular ache of a person grieving someone they never got the chance to know. "I'm sorry, buddy," Terry said. "What happened?" "Cancer," Eli said. "He found out when my mom was pregnant with me. The doctors gave him maybe a year. He got about 10 months. He paused. He knew almost the whole time I was coming that he probably wouldn't get to raise me." Heidi Klum's expression went soft and careful. Howie Mandel nodded slowly. Sofia Vergara pressed a hand to her chest. Simon sat very still, the way a person sits when they are waiting to find out whether what they suspect is about to be confirmed. "My dad was a vocal coach," Eli said. "Choir director at a church, taught lessons on the side. When he found out he was sick, he decided there was one thing he could actually leave me that I could use. Not just photos, not just letters, but something I could do something with. So he made one video. A singing lesson. Recorded on an old camcorder, sitting at our kitchen table, teaching breath support and tone to a baby who couldn't understand a word of it. Eli's voice held steady, the practiced steadiness of someone who had explained this before, to himself, if no one else. It's the only video that exists of him talking. The only time I've ever heard his voice. I've watched it so many times I know it by heart. It's literally the only singing lesson I've ever had." He looked at the sound booth. "Can you play it? The whole thing. Not just a clip. I want you to see what he actually taught me." The engineer nodded. The lights dimmed slightly. The screen behind the judge's table came to life. A young man appeared. Thin in the particular way that chemotherapy thins a person. Pale, dark circles under steady eyes, sitting at a kitchen table with an acoustic guitar resting against his knee. He was perhaps 30 years old, though illness had aged his face beyond it. Off camera, faintly, a baby's sounds were audible, not crying, just the small, ordinary noises of an infant somewhere in the room. He did not cry in the video. He did not say goodbye. He looked into the camera with the focused, patient expression of a teacher beginning a lesson, and he said, "Okay. This is for you. Whenever you're ready to use it, let's start with breathing. Because everything else depends on this." He spent the next several minutes. The full video ran just under 6 minutes, teaching diaphragmatic breath support with the careful, practical clarity of someone who had taught hundreds of students and knew exactly how to make a complicated thing simple. He demonstrated, placing one hand flat against his own stomach to show the movement, pausing occasionally to glance off camera toward the sound of the baby, smiling once at something only he could see. He explained the physical mechanics. He sang 2 bars to illustrate a point about tone placement, his voice clear and warm despite everything his body was working against. Near the end, he looked directly into the camera and said, simply, without ceremony, "I don't know how old you'll be when you watch this. I don't know if you'll be a singer at all, that's entirely up to you. But if you ever want to be, this is how you start. This is everything I know how to teach in the time I've got. I hope it's enough." The video ended. The Dolby Theater was completely silent. Simon Cowell sat at the judge's table with both hands pressed to his face. His shoulders moved once, twice. He had recognized, within the first 30 seconds of that video, a teaching method he had encountered exactly once before in his career. A specific, somewhat unconventional approach to breath support that he had seen described in a demo reel submitted to an educational vocal program his company had loosely sponsored years earlier. A reel that had been reviewed, logged, and ultimately passed over amid hundreds of other submissions during a period when the program was overwhelmed with material. He had not thought about that reel in over a decade. His team had found it that morning, after 2 days of him asking quiet questions about where Eli's technique had come from. To understand what Simon had spent the last 2 days confirming, you need to understand what had happened 10 years earlier. Eli's father, Thomas Marsh, had been an ambitious but largely unknown vocal coach in Indianapolis, the kind of working music educator whose talent was real but whose visibility was limited to a single church choir and a handful of private students. He had developed, over years of teaching, a particular method for breath support that diverged slightly from conventional technique, an approach built around a sequence of physical cues he had worked out through trial and observation, something he believed made the fundamentals click faster for beginners than the methods he had been taught himself. He had recorded a demo reel explaining the method and submitted it, hopefully and a little nervously, to an educational outreach program that a company connected to Simon's growing media interests had sponsored as part of a broader investment in music education access. The program received hundreds of submissions that year. Thomas Marsh's reel was reviewed by a junior staffer, logged as promising, and then filed. The way promising things sometimes are when a program is too large and too underfunded to follow up on all of them. No rejection letter was sent. No acceptance either. It simply sat in an archive, waiting. 3 months later, Thomas Marsh received his diagnosis. He never heard back about the reel. He likely assumed, in the brief window of health he had left, that it had been quietly declined, the way most things are when the silence stretches long enough. He did not know that 10 years later, footage of his exact teaching method, taught by his own son who had never met him, would be sitting in front of the very man whose company had once filed his reel away and never followed through. He spent his last months doing the thing he knew how to do regardless of whether anyone ever recognized it, he taught. He taught the only student he would ever have time for, even though that student was 8 months old and could not yet understand a single word. He thought it might be the only lesson his son would ever receive from him. He was right about that. He did not know whether his son would ever use it. He did not know it would one day stand alone in front of 3,000 people as the entire foundation of a technique that would carry his son onto a stage neither of them had ever imagined. He thought that was the most he could responsibly leave behind. Until tonight, when his own teaching method, recovered from an archive nobody had opened in a decade, was confirmed by the very man who had once, without realizing it, let a promising reel from an unknown vocal coach in Indianapolis slip past, unanswered. Simon Cowell lowered his hands from his face. He looked at Eli Marsh, standing at the microphone. "I need to tell you something," Simon said, his voice not yet steady. "Your father submitted a teaching reel to a program my company sponsored 10 years ago. I just found out this morning we never got back to him. I am so sorry that we never got back to him." He paused. "But I want you to know, what he taught you in that video is genuinely good technique. Real technique, the kind we look for and rarely find. He was right to believe in it." Eli's composure, steady through the entire telling, moved for the first time. Just slightly. He pressed his lips together. "Can I ask you something about it?" Simon said. "The breath sequence he taught, the 4-count placement before the phrase. Did you ever modify it, or is that exactly how he showed you?" "Exactly how he showed me," Eli said. "I never changed it. It's the only way I know." Simon nodded slowly. "Share this story if it moved you. Subscribe so you never miss moments like these." The audience had been quiet through the technical exchange in a way that felt different from the usual eruption. A held, respectful quiet. The sound of 3,000 people understanding they were witnessing something more like a continuation than a conclusion. Howie Mandel sat with his head in his hands. Heidi Klum wiped her face. Sofia Vergara had not moved through the entire video, her eyes fixed on the screen the whole time. Simon stood. He walked around the judges' table, something he had never done in 15 seasons, and crossed to the stage. He stepped up. He walked to Eli and crouched down to his level, the way Terry had at the start. "Your dad would be unbelievably proud of you," Simon said. "Not just of your voice, of what you did with what he gave you. That's the whole thing right there." He stood. He stepped back. "Sing the lesson," Simon said. "Show us everything he taught." Eli Marsh went to the microphone. He breathed. The 4-count placement, visible if you knew to look for it. The exact sequence from a video recorded a decade earlier by a man who would never see his son use it. He closed his eyes. He opened them. He sang. His technique was clean and precise in a way that felt almost startling from a 9-year-old. Not flashy, not oversold, just correct. The product of one teacher's careful method passed down through a screen and absorbed completely by a student who had nothing else to compare it to and so had simply trusted it entirely. When the last note ended, Simon Cowell pressed the golden buzzer. Gold confetti fell. Eli Marsh stood in the center of it and looked up, and for the first time all evening, his composure gave way completely, not in sadness, but in something that looked almost like relief. The particular relief of a child who has just proven, to a room full of strangers and to himself, that the only lesson he ever got was enough. In the weeks that followed, Simon's company located and funded a permanent vocal education scholarship in Thomas Marsh's name, specifically for promising but under-resourced music educators whose work might otherwise go unrecognized. The kind of program that would have changed Thomas Marsh's own life, had it existed for him in time. Eli still watches the video. He will probably always watch it. He has long since memorized every gesture, every pause, every word, every small smile his father made toward a sound he couldn't yet understand. He does not need to watch it to remember the lesson anymore. He watches it because it is the only place his father still exists in motion, still teaching, still trying, in the brief window of time he had, to give his son something that would outlast him. A lesson taught once, with everything you have, can keep teaching long after the teacher is gone. That is the entire quiet miracle of it. Love does not need years to leave something permanent. Sometimes it only needs 6 minutes, a kitchen table, and the will to try.